So in Ardy Lightfoot, you play as this weird cat fox man. He's got a hat. And he also has this companion. And this reminds me a ton of Klonoa, which was a game for the PS1 where you had this ring, and the ring would shoot out this guy and grab enemies. That's not exactly how this works. Your buddy is a little dude, and you shoot him out, and he eats bad guys. So it's a little different, but it's very reminiscent of Klonoa. And if you get hit, you lose that buddy, and then you don't have an attack other than jumping on things. Until you get to a treasure chest, and then your buddy pops out. Unless you have him already, and then like an extra life pops out. And the problem with the system is, well, there's a couple problems. And it mostly comes down to the control scheme. So, when you jump on an enemy, you don't hurt them, you get hurt, you would die. If you press A, or the jump button, when you're in the air, you will kind of coil your tail below you. And then, if you land on an enemy that way, you'll jump off them and they'll get hurt. Hopefully. You know, there's some enemies you can't do that to. So what happens is, the game becomes difficult enough that you usually don't keep your buddy for very long. He's kind of there to protect you from getting hurt. Because if you just died instantly when you got hit, this game would be like too hard. So they do a good job of giving you your buddy, even though you don't really use him to attack. Because later in the game, if you attack an enemy with him, there are enemies that it doesn't even affect them. So basically he becomes useless other than as an extra. He's like the mask from Crash Bandicoots, basically. So that's kind of a problem in itself, because they're kind of taking this whole aspect of your character and kind of not utilizing it in the way it was obviously meant to be utilized. But the controls for jumping on enemies, it's not a good system. It doesn't feel good to start with, but the way you have to hit A in the air doesn't feel natural, and it leads to situations where if you're trying to, like, there's this thing I'll talk about later in the game where you're trying to jump between moving platforms. Okay, so if you hit A in the air, like I said, you're going to do a super jump when you land. And there are situations where you don't want to do that, but you also want to be able to jump quickly. So you're kind of having to not press A when you feel like you should be pressing A to jump, because you're going to be landing on platforms that are moving pretty rapidly. The more natural way would be to let you jump onto enemies, and then, because like you get to the first boss, which is this mole that throws his like helmet at you, and it's a really cute boss. Like, all the bosses are really cool in this game, but I didn't have an instruction manual in front of me, so I didn't realize that you couldn't jump on him. Because if you try to jump on him normally, you get hurt, and he doesn't get hurt. You have to do the tail bounce thing. And the only way I figured that out was kind of through trial and error. And then once you realize that, it makes the rest of the game make sense. But it's kind of the main concept of the game. Okay, so the main plot is, okay, it's like the most generic plot in any video game. The rainbow got split into 7 crystals, you know, the 7 different colors of the rainbow, and you gotta go get them. But they do really cool things with the overworld map and the characters. So between each level, you have like this really cute, like, isometric view of the world, and it shows it shows Ardy kind of moving between areas. And it's just really cool to look at. And then there's like this Indiana Jones-ish character who kind of helps you out. He's like, it's really charming, because he, like, you're in trouble, and all of a sudden this Indiana Jones looking guy just swoops in and helps you, and then he's like gone. And it's like, oh no, there's this one time where it looks like he dies, but then during the last boss fight he comes in and he helps you, and it's really cute. And I mean, other than that, there's not really, there's like this girl that you're like trying to save, I guess, but that's not a big deal. The story is not the reason to play this game, but it's cute, and I appreciate the touches they put in there. And then it starts off just kind of as a generic platformer, but then what happens is, as you get to like the 3rd, 4th, 5th level, it starts to become more maze oriented. And by maze, I mean you're like underground, and there are paths you take, and you don't really follow a linear path from A to B. And a lot of games do this. It's not like something crazy, but I really like the way, like, there's this level it's like basically in a tomb, and I like what they do with the puzzles. They're not really puzzles, it's just, it ramps up the difficulty very quickly, but in a way that is very understandable. Like, you're on a moving block, and then you have to duck under spikes, and that makes sense because there's stars underneath the spikes. So, and then, like, that's more difficult than stuff you have been shown before, but then you get to another one where it's moving and there's these big platforms you have to jump over. And that's a bump up in difficulty from ducking under the spikes, and it happens pretty quickly, but it feels very natural. That's like a very natural progression of difficulty. And the problem with this level is it kind of signals the shift in this game from a fun, kind of difficult, charming platformer into kind of a sadistic, charming platformer. Because all of a sudden, so this is where this game I realized was not a great game. Is one of the levels is this tower, and there are arrows shooting back and forth. Like, there's a wall of arrows shooting right, and there's a wall of arrows shooting left. And what you have to do is, the entire level is jumping between these arrows. And then at the very top, there's an enemy, and you need to super bounce off of him up out of the tower. And, I mean, this, on its head, this is super boring level design. It's like, this feels like a prototype of a level, basically, or like one small section of a level. And then if you fall, and it's very easy to fall because the width of the platform, like, you have to stand on the arrow, and the width of the amount of space you can stand on is shorter than the arrow's graphics. So it's very easy to misjudge and fall. And that's super frustrating, and it's even more frustrating because there is no variety to it. There's 20 rows of arrows, and you just jump between them. So if you fall up, you just have to do exactly what you just did over and over again until you beat it. And because of the way the continue system works, if you die, you just start over that level again. There's like no consequence to it. There's no punishment for it other than having to do this level again. And it's not a very good level. And then if you beat that level, there's just like super hard, like, spike mazes you have to get through. Your guy turns into like a flying thing, and you have to do that. And it's basically, you just have to memorize what the level is because there's like timing issues involved. And so if you're in the wrong spot when the spikes close down, then you just basically have to start that section over again. And if you lose your guy by getting hit, there's no real way to get back to safe ground, so you basically just have to sit there and wait for your invincibility to wear off, and then you die, and then you start over. And then after that, there's actually this cool level, but it's also like stupid because it's too hard. You're like running, and there's a mirror underneath you, and arrows shoot out, and there are arrows in your reflection that also shoot out. So you have to make sure that neither you nor your reflection are getting hit by these arrows, which is a really cool idea, but all it is you memorizing those arrows and then just dodging them, which is easier said than done, I guess. But because, like, that stuff's not fun. The whole end of this game is not fun. This is like the last third of the game is just kind of a wash. And it's a huge bummer because there's a lot of promise in the first 2/3 of the game, and I think a lot of that shines through in the boss fights. Well, even in the level design, there's a ton of variety. So after you go through like the mines, which involve like this whole minecart race and the first boss, and you're kind of getting a grasp of things, and you go through that tomb and everything, but there's also this giant tree you have to climb, and it's a very vertical level, which hadn't been the norm. And you're kind of jumping between platforms, and they're like rotating, so you have to like time everything, and it's a cool level. And then you get to the boss of this section, and it's this really cool boss fight where there are these like big punching gloves, and they're attached to buttons. And so what you are trying to do is jump onto the button that will make the punching bag punch the boss, because she's standing next to one of the punching bags. But she's also trying to do the same thing to you. So it's this really cool dynamic where you're both trying to kill each other using the exact same tools, which is not something I see in boss fights a lot. And it's pretty easy to game this boss because you can just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. But the idea behind it, I think, is really cool. And then there's just like more generic bosses where there's this owl captain and he like shoots lasers and rockets at you, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it's not a great boss fight from a game design perspective, but I think it's really cool. It's just fun to play. And after you beat it, he like becomes your buddy, sorta, and that's cool. This game needed that extra something to it. Never really strives to be anything other than a fun platform. And for most of the game, that's what it is, with notable exceptions. I enjoyed my time with it. I'd recommend it to people who, I know this has kind of flown under the radar. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about this game. I think it's worth a playthrough. It's not going to take up much of your time. I had fun with it.